Hello guys, welcome to the Murder She Shed. My name is Holly. This is the place where I have true crime right in my she shed twice a week. Have you ever heard of the strange case of serial rapist and possible serial killer that went from Robin Hood to Michael Myers from Halloween? This is actually a perfect night for this story because today on Wacky World Wednesday, it's a full moon. And this is the perfect full moon story because the Beast of Jersey only attacked during a full moon. Although this guy looks like he should be the dad Ward Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver. Don't get too eager because he's actually an underachiever. And he definitely deserves to be on my Wacky World list of crimes. First, before we get started, don't be a glutton. Smash that like and subscribe button. For more true crime, make those buttons chime. I know you secretly love this Southern girl's rhymes. Now it's time for some more true crime. Alright guys, this is the true crime story of Edward John Lewis Paisnel, aka Michael Myers. This is a picture of him. Doesn't he give you that Leave It to Beaver vibe? He is far from that, although he was a family man. That was far from everything that he was. Edward was born in 1925. Although Edward came from a wealthy family, he was barely a teenager when the United Kingdom declared war on Germany in 1939 and was at one point briefly imprisoned for stealing food to give to the poor, just like Robin Hood. Now, how could a guy, the only crime he committed was to steal from the rich to give to the poor, be such an evil guy, you say? You just wait till you hear the rest of the story. He lived on the Isle of Jersey. Jersey is part of the Channel Islands located between England and France, the largest of the islands. Jersey is 9 miles long and 5 miles wide. Still not very big. Famously, one of the sunniest corners of Britain. The island has tropical feel in parts with palm trees and wide sandy beaches. Sounds like a perfect place, but it was until Edward grew up. Edward was a construction worker on the island and was married to a woman named Joan. It was his second marriage. They married in 1959 and she already had 2 children. So then Edward became father to the 2 stepchildren and eventually they had a daughter of their own. This is Simon. This is my little boy. He's not so little, but he's my little boy. Nonetheless, it's our she shed. We share it together. He's the only boy allowed in my she shed. Facts. Joan wrote a book called The Beast of Jersey, and I actually seen that it went out of publication. She wrote it about her husband, and it looked as though it was pretty expensive now, and that may have been the copy I seen. She's pretty much claimed that their marriage was a sham. The couple were no longer really intimate, and Edward was said to have a low sex drive. Unbeknownst to Joan, that simply wasn't true. He just liked violent sex. And he had actually been sexually assaulting women for 2 years before they even met. Joan worked in a children's home for orphan children, where Edward would dress up like old Saint Nick for Christmas. The children called him Uncle Ted. That don't sound like a pedo name at all, does it? And he handed out sweets and toys while trying to groom children. And I don't mean brush their hair. Joan said that he kept all of his possessions in a special locked section of the house that all other family members were forbidden to enter. Ladies, I'm telling you now, if your man does that, run. Not a good sign. Edward assaulted his first victim in 1957. She was a young woman just waiting on the bus to come in a remote area at a bus stop, when he came from behind and tied a rope around her neck and dragged her into the woods by this rope, where he sexually assaulted her. The woman claimed he had a face covering, a long overcoat, a pair of gloves, and a hat on. The poor woman ended up getting pregnant from this rape. And unfortunately, no one believed that she had been raped. The gossip was going around that, to put it lightly, she was just easy. And she ended up adopting her baby out and moving from the island because of all the gossip and ridicule. That is really so sad. Because the bus stop thing seemed to be working out so good with him, he decided not to stop a good thing. And he kept that up. Then on March 6, 1958, a 26-year-old woman was waiting at a bus stop when she would accept a lift off of a man who claimed to be a doctor, just picking up his wife. So she gets in the car with him. Once inside the car, she was attacked and blindfolded, tied up and dragged to a field where she was raped. Afterwards, she was taken back to the car but managed to escape when he came to a stop. Two men from another car and a couple who lived nearby came to her aid, but Edwards had already fled the scene by the time they showed up. And so, he got bored of the bus stop pickup. So in 1960, he began breaking into women's homes in order to rape them. In March 1960, a 43-year-old woman and her 14-year-old daughter would be subject to a terrifying home invasion. The phone rang in the middle of the night. After she picked it up and said hello, she heard a click and then a dial tone. She didn't think much about it, so she just went back to bed. Later, about an hour later, she heard a noise coming from downstairs. She just figured it was her daughter up and around, so she drifted back off to sleep. This is when her dog started barking. So she just started heading down the stairs. I'm going to tell you right now, as a southern Oklahoma woman, I am not just going to head down the stairs. This woman is going to grab a weapon. I'm just saying. I don't know what you guys do in other states. Most women in this state know how to take care of themselves. Just warning you if you ever decide to rob in Oklahoma. So as she was heading downstairs, the lights suddenly went out all over the house. She ran for the telephone to call the police. She got there and the phone lines had been cut. This is when Edward came from behind, threw a rope around her neck, dragged her to a chair, threw her into the chair. She looked at him, and he had this creepy mask on. I'm talking about Michael Myers-like mask. He demanded money and threatened to kill her. This is when her daughter woke up during the commotion and started down the stairs. She hollered at her daughter, "Get back up those stairs and lock that door." But Edwards headed up the stairs after the daughter. During this time, the mother was able to escape out the door. As a mother, and I'm not trying to judge the lady, I am not going to leave my kids with this man. I only have 2 boys. I don't have a daughter, and they're grown, but I wouldn't even leave them alone with this man. Nope, I'm too much of a mother hen for that, I'm going to tell you. So she ran to the neighbor's house. They did not answer the door, so she couldn't call the police. She ran back to her barn where she was able to find something to untie her hands with. And then she decided to go back into her house to check on her daughter. It was too late. Edwards had already fled. And Her daughter was running in from the back field, and she seen her, and she had cuts all over her face, bloody nose, and she had been raped. Yes, raped. 14 years old. He became known as the Beast of Jersey because he would literally look terrifying as he would slink through the bedroom window of your home dressed in a leather mask that is eerie enough to give any adult nightmares. An outline of lips with no expression, 2 tiny eye holes cut out in a dirty, spiky women's wig that was tied down with a bandana, and it was all wrapped around his face with a nylon cord. This is the picture of the actual mask modeled by the police after the arrest. He also wore a long, dark overcoat with wristbands that had protruding 1-inch nails attached to them. Check that out. That is insane. It is thought to have been worn by him in case anyone was try to grab him as he escaped. These nails would often cut the victims during the sexual assaults, though. He also had nails attached to the inside of his coat, like the bottom parts of his coat, for the same reason, to get away. He always had a rope tied around his waist that he took off to tie onto his victim's neck and hands. It made for a terrifying scene as he crawled through a window at night, usually around 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. in order to take them by surprise. Like I told you, most of the Beast attacks occurred on a full moon night. It was Valentine's Day 1960 when a 12-year-old boy woke up to find a man in his house. The intruder used a rope to place around the boy's neck, and then the boy was pulled into a nearby field and sodomized. Can you imagine how terrified this boy must have been? With this guy with this mask, oh, I don't even know. And a short time later, 14-year-old girl would awake to the sight of a masked man staring at her. Wake up and see that? She screamed and he fled. I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine. That's just terrifying. He seemed to always focus on women or young children, boy, girl, it did not matter as long as he was stronger than them and he could control them. When he first started, it was more on women, and then as the crimes grew, he became more focused on children. And I don't know if he maybe lost control of a woman and it kind of spooked him, and then he went to children. I am not sure of this. It was said that he would crawl around in the attic of the orphanage his wife worked at and spy on children, deciding which one he wanted next. In July of 1960, his youngest victim, an 8-year-old boy, was abducted from his home by a man in a coat. He was taken to a field, sexually assaulted, and then taken back home and left on his parents' doorsteps. The victims would say that he spoke during the attacks often in a soft Irish accent. He would mention a wife, a dead mother, and that he had murdered before. Sounds like he needs a psychologist to me. This guy needs some help. He also often spoke of dropping lighters and cigarette lighters at the crime scene. Later, he would admit to faking the Irish accent. And the cigarettes were just a disguise as well because he didn't even smoke. Every victim complained that the suspect had a musky odor about him. The Beast had now been active for 3 years, and the police were no closer to catching him. They had questioned 30,000 people, called in males, all the males with criminal records. They had fingerprinted all but 13 men on the island, and still they could not get a break in this case. One of the 13 men that refused to be fingerprinted was none other than Edwards himself. Caving in to mounting pressure and public anger, They called in outside help in the shape of Detective Superintendent Jack Manning, a celebrated murder detective from Scotland Yard. Sounds like a Sherlock Holmes, doesn't it? Manning encouraged the islanders to turn detective and set up neighborhood watches and looked out for each other. He also issued the press with a toolkit for helping to track down the perpetrator. No Sherlock Holmes, because apparently he wanted them to do all the work, sounds like to me. During this time, they developed a suspect that they soon realized was not the real attacker. Alphonse, look at this little old guy. He is a fisherman, and he looks like the sweetest guy, like he wouldn't hurt a flea. He became the main suspect. He was a loner and liked to go on late night walks. And because he had a raincoat that was tied with a rope, he suddenly was the serial rapist. Alphonse had been questioned by police for 14 hours, and his house was searched 12 times in 12 months. They could not find any evidence to tie him to any of the crimes. His name, however, was still leaked to the press, and a hate campaign ensued. Sounds like the press nowadays, doesn't it? Sounds kind of familiar. Nonetheless, poor Alphonse' house got burned down by the islanders, and he became homeless. And he decided to leave the island. He moved to a secluded island where he just lived by himself and actually did pretty well for himself. I imagine he didn't mind being away from these horrible people. And after he left, the attacks continued to happen. And during this time, Edward was volunteering at the children's home to care for the children. He and his wife even took in some of the children. Edward was accused of abusing both the staff and orphans he was asked to assist. But he was never reported, and you may find out later why. Meanwhile, there was 3 more children that had been raped and sodomized by this mask-wearing psychopath. Then suddenly the assault stopped for 2 years. In November 1963, he again assaulted an 11-year-old boy and then laid low until July of 1964 when he attacked a 10-year-old girl. In August of 1964, a 16-year-old girl would be assaulted. And then he once again disappeared. Not sure. It didn't say why they thought he took a break. I'm thinking that he thought the cops were closing in on him, maybe. Could be. In 1966, he then taunted authorities by sending them a letter. Yes, a letter. And this is what it said. My dear sir, I think it is just the time to tell you that you're just wasting your time, as every time I have done what I always intended to do. And remember, it will not stop at this, but I will be fair to you and give you a chance. Sounds like he called him a dummy to me. I have never had much out of this life, but I intend to get everything I can now. I have always wanted to do the perfect crime. I have done this, but this time, let the moon shine very bright in September, because this time it must be perfect, not 1 but 2. I am not a maniac by a long shot. I like to play with you people. You will hear from me before September, and I will give you all the clues just to see if you can catch me. Yours very sincerely, Wait and See. Yep, that's definitely a taunt. And sure enough, in the August of 1966, he attacked again. A 15-year-old girl was assaulted. And for the first time, the victim would have scratches, straight scratches across her torso. That was later known to be from the nails that he had put inside of his coat. And when he was assaulting her, it would scratch her. He actually hid in the bushes outside her home, and then jumped out to grab her. This startled her, causing her to flee, I imagine. Edward managed to catch and overpower her, Then he dragged her to a field the same way he did the others and sexually assaulted her. She recalls him saying to her, "Do you know how long it takes to kill a woman? 5 minutes." And she also stated she couldn't breathe, and he told her not to scream as he put the rope around her neck and pulled her to her feet. The second attack from this letter never occurred. Then came a 4-year gap until his next attack. A 13-year-old boy who was sleeping in his bed woke to an unfamiliar voice and a light shining in his eyes. The man asked him where his father's money was. Then he told him to get out of bed and climb out the window, where the boy obeyed. And then he took the boy to a field behind his house, where he spread out his coat and told the boy to lay on his coat. There he sexually assaulted him. The boy heard a noise and looked around. Then Edward told him that more people, this is creepy, that more people were watching them. He was warned that if he told anyone what had happened, his parents would be harmed. He then walked the boy back home. "What a gent," said sarcastically. Crazy. Initially, the terrified child said nothing. He kept quiet. The parents noticed the cuts in his disheveled appearance, and then he finally caved and told them what had happened. Fortunately, he was the last known victim of Edward, because after 14 years he had finally been caught in 1971. Wow, dude, that stunk. Then, one sticky summer night in 1971, 2 Jersey police officers witnessed a car driving erratically. The car hopped curbs, clipped other vehicles, and drove through a hedge straight into a tomato field. I never thought about there actually being huge tomato fields. I mean, around here we just grow it in our garden. I mean, we grow like wheat and barley and corn and cotton and things like that in Oklahoma, but I've never seen a huge tomato field. What even state grows huge tomato fields? Maybe somebody out there might know, because I never even thought about it, really. The driver attempted to bail out of the vehicle before it was stopped. He attempted to run away, but luckily, them officers had not been eating Dunkin' Donuts, and the cops were faster and were able to tackle and handcuff him. He was brought into the police station and questioned. It was apparent this was no ordinary reckless driver. He wore an odd, dark outfit and emitted a strong, musty smell. The cops found a flashlight that had all the reflective parts taped off. And he also had one extremely creepy homemade mask. He then told them, and I'm not even kidding, that he had all this stuff because he'd been driving to a sex orgy. Yes, sex orgy. I mean, what kind of orgy would invite Michael Myers to their party anyway? Nope, just nope. The cops were not buying that. They knew the description of the sexual rapist, and it exactly fit Edwards to a T. Finally, the secret room in Edwards' house was revealed. The room was locked, windowless, and contained an assortment of incriminating possessions. It was hidden by a large bookcase filled with books about Satanism, witchcraft, and the book of the French serial killer Gilles de Reyes that had tortured, raped, and killed boys during the 1400s. We need to do one about him probably. And Edwards would later claim that he was his ancestor. When they went inside the secret room, it had that same musty smell that all the victims stated that Edwards had smelled like. I don't know if it's because of a moldy room or what, I'm not sure. There was a blue tracksuit with semen stains all over it. There was a large knife with a wooden blade hanging over a glass chalice that gave him the impression of a shrine or altar. There was a camera hanging on a hook and several photographs of various houses. It became clear that Edward had planned his attacks carefully, photographing and stalking the homes of potential victims and studying the targets obsessively over time to be sure of their routines and movements. Edward claimed he belonged to a secret society, an elite group of Satanists. In December 1971, it would only take 38 minutes of deliberation for Edward to be found guilty on all 13 charges against 6 of his victims. Although he had countless victims, he only got charged with 6. He was sentenced to 30 years, which he would serve at Winchester Prison in England. But as if a lot of these bad guys, he was released 10 years early because of good behavior in prison. And in a stunning display of arrogance, Edward tried to return to Jersey after his release. But the residents, needless to say, had other ideas, and he was run off the island. He lived out the remainder of his days on the Isle of Wight, I'm not sure, where he suffered a heart attack in 1991. In 2008, the former children's home that Edward was known to frequent, police discovered what they thought was a human skull, later to be found out just to be milk teeth from the orphaned children. They also found shackles under the dirt which was attached to the wall. Although authorities deny that Edwards had anything to do with what occurred at this orphanage, they say that staff was very abusive to the children. There was just a bad history of abuse and neglect by the orphanage. But if you think about it, that's exactly what Edwards was to have done to the children. He abused them. And so is this why the people there did not report him? Because they were doing the exact same thing to these poor children. That's horrible. I wouldn't doubt that he wasn't actually a serial killer. They just haven't found it out. But he was definitely creepy enough to be a serial killer. Well, guys, that's it this week for Wacky World Wednesday. Make sure you guys join me Sunday for Suspense She Shed Sunday. I'd love to have you. And you know you love a Southern girl. And this Southern girl loves you. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe for weekly true crime content from the Murder She Shed. Stay safe out there on this full moon night. Make sure you lock your doors and windows up tight so you don't have some guy looking kind of like Michael Myers climbing through your window. All right, guys. I'll see you Sunday. Come back and see me now. You hear? Bye.